This is John Drabinski, and you're listening to the Black Studies Podcast, a series of conversations examining the history of the field. Our conversations engage with a wide range of activists and scholars, senior figures in the field, graduate students, and everyone in between, culture workers, and political organizers, in order to explore the cultural and political meaning of Black studies as an area of inquiry and its critical methods. Today's conversation is with writer and poet Khalisa Thompson, who is co-founder and co-director of Griot and Gray Owl Black Southern Writers Conference. Her writing has been featured in a number of literary and popular venues, and she is the author of Real Girls Have Real Problems and of Ghost in a Black Girl's Throat. In this conversation, we discuss the intersection of writing and memory work, poetry and community connection, and the politics of publishing on Black life. Good afternoon, Khalisa. How are you?
Hey, doing pretty good. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm really excited to have you on the podcast. I have said this in recent episodes, so if you listen to them, you'll hear we were making a real effort on the podcast to get more writers and artists on. We've been very scholar heavy, and having creative people on the podcast is absolutely essential to reflecting the field of Black studies in its most expansive sense. And so I'm really excited to have you on the podcast today for that reason. Also really interested to hear you talk about your work, about your process, how you think about all sorts of things about the past and history of Black writing. So long way of saying, welcome to the Black Studies Podcast. I look forward to the conversation.
Likewise. So excited to chat with you.
So we'll have a chance, of course, to talk about your writing and how you think about study in relation to that, about the past and future of Black poetry. But I'm interested, before we get to that, to ask you a more personal question. Like, what is it that drew you as a writer to work on Black life? Like, what were those experiences, whether there's political, communal, childhood, educational, all of those kinds of experiences that brought writing and Black life together for you?
Yeah, that's such a great question. When I was looking at this and preparing, I was thinking about how I had such an interesting childhood. And we talked offline about how I was born in Gary, and really I was always living at a point of contradiction or contention. My lived experiences were very much so at odds with each other. And so when I think about what I write about now, many years later, almost 40 years later, this will be my 40th year, I think about how those years coming up were very formative and influential to my writing now. As a Black woman, I think it's inherent. There's this friend that I have, Tank, who's in the group now, Tank and the Bangas, and she always, in her poetry, she says, when I write a poem, it's not a Black poem. It's just a poem written by a Black girl. And so what I would say is when I start to write, while I'm very intentional with my work, I'm not consciously thinking about writing about Black life in the way that some people would think. But I do think that because I was born in the 80s at a very highly charged political time, social economic time in the 80s, pop culture. And so that was very pivotal to the things that I write about now because they had such a deep impact on me. And also, the year I was born, we were named the murder capital of the world. And my mother taught at a school. She was in the school system. And yeah, we would fear for her life every time she would go to teach because there were always shutdowns because of mass shootings. So that, I think, was something that really influenced my writing and shows up in my writing now, shows up in the way that I talk about Black life. I definitely think being the daughter of folks that were activists. So my mother was an activist and she met my father at an activist Black Panther rally. And so I think that not only has shaped who I am, but how I speak about race and politics and identity. And then I just think my choice to, go to private school, and I was the only Black girl in several of my classes. I write a lot about that, and I think that that has really influenced the way I see colorism and classism, because I was living in Gary at the same time going to this very posh, conservative, Christian, all white private school. And so now, what's ironic is that is really the crux of all the things that I'm writing right now, this contention between race and religion, and then also queer identity. And so, yeah, I think it's just interesting to look back on all those formative things that were dominoes that set me up for who I am today, but also has deeply influenced my current books and all of my future work. All of my future work really deals with that contradiction of faith and conservatism, and also pleasure and identity and race, and how in the Black community those things are really at war and at odds with each other.
Hmm.
We were very religious. Like that also is like having these big matriarchal figures in my life, and these women that were highly educated. Like my grandmother was a librarian. My mom is a social worker and was teaching in the school system while also being a social worker. Everybody had multiple degrees. And so there was that contention a lot with me being very curious about like body and pleasure and romance and dating, and really wanting to like, I started writing at a very young age. And so I would like write these like YA stories, my mom says, when I was like 8. I would write and write and write. And so I was always fascinated with coming of age stories. But that was so taboo, really, for this like little Black church girl to be talking about like dating and coming of age and body exploration. And so now what I do is I write kind of solely about those things that were seen as like a no-no, or that were hush hush when I was growing up. So yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, no, I was going to ask you about how, when sort of writing became a part of this trajectory. So, you said age 8. I mean, that's that would be pretty early. I also like that you said coming of age, and I was like, coming of age before coming of age is kind of an amazing place to be writing from, actually.
Yeah, well, you know what? I literally just had that light bulb that I was so influenced by popular culture that you're right. I was writing about a time that was beyond where I even was from a maturation standpoint. And literally, I'm just now thinking about this right now, that that's kind of wild that we were so lucky in the 90s to have like what I believe to be the best television that like existed. And I'm a
Hmm.
little biased because I'm an 80s baby, but I do believe that we were so influenced by the Boy Meets Worlds, and the Family Matters and all of and the Full Houses, that there was something about that time in popular culture and in music that really changed me and made me want to see myself reflected more. And yeah, I've been writing prose since I could write stories. And still to this day, I told my mom, I was like, can you send me all my stories? And she's like, we can't find them. They're somewhere hidden in the house.
Oh, they have to
Um,
find those.
they have to find
Yeah.
those, right? I still remember, like, it's crazy to say that I still remember some of the coming of age stories that I wrote about, and really it was a form of escapism because I was surrounded by so much violence, not just out in the community, but at home. I was a survivor of a lot of violence, and so writing those coming of age stories, there was a through line where the main character would use art as their escape. And it's interesting now I'm seeing that theme come back in a lot of the YA TV shows that I like, that there's always this girl who's like using arts, or she secretly wants to be a writer or a singer, and that's like her escape. And I've been writing that same story since I was a little girl. So, yeah.
Amazing. How did that follow you into college? I mean, was college like this moment of a shift? Because, I mean, It's interesting in this podcast, whether it's writers and artists or academic writers, it's always, we always start with a sort of question about sort of what connected you to the kind of work that you do. What's that sort of story? And sometimes it's just something very deeply embedded in their schooling that draws us out of them, and college becomes a continuum. Right. Sometimes school's an absolute contradiction to like home life and
Yeah.
community values. But there's always for me this really interesting moment, like what is that moment of higher education, which in your case is going to be like obviously a shift in terms of all of those possibilities. It's not that private school. It's not in Gary. It's not at
Yeah.
home.
Yeah. Okay, so I get really excited to talk about my story because it's kind of it's really wild. So I thought that I wanted to be an actress. I when my mom says that when we were 4 and 5, we were a very movie-heavy family,
Mm.
and so popular culture and movies and media were very big, entertainment, and so we used to sing. She used to do four-part harmony with us on the bed singing every single line to Aladdin, to Beauty and the Beast, and that's how, like, she knew that I was destined to be some type of performer
Hmm.
because she said, "You were the one that, like, at 4 and 5 could, like, hold a note, you knew all the parts to the music, and you just, like" you see those videos of, like, Beyoncé or Britney Spears when they were really young and they were first learning that they wanted to be a star. My mom was like, "That was you. You
Uh-huh,
would jump
uh-huh.
off the bed and you would grab the mic and you would like you had the sass and the pizzazz and you had the personality and the showmanship." And so because my family saw that I had this showmanship, they put me in we kind of the writing was just an escape. We that was never really pursued, um professionally. And so what was pursued since I was very young was commercials, acting, stage, theater. And so throughout high school, I kept writing stories on the side, and writing skits and stories, and little plays, but I never took any formal training. And I was a theater kid through and through, choir, show choir, musical theater. It wasn't until, I experienced a bunch of trauma my senior year, and I was like, "I am so ready to get the farthest away from Maryville, Indiana," and I didn't get into the film and acting schools that I wanted to, like Columbia, like USC. And that by this time, my sister had gotten into USC, and my sister was on track to be a producer and a director. And so I was like, I want to follow in her footsteps, and I'm
Hmm.
gonna go somewhere that like will take me. And so it just so happened that my dad at the time was the Chamber of Commerce director. He was visiting randomly. Um, Wilmington, North Carolina, because at the time movies were booming in Wilmington, North Carolina, and their commerce was out of this world, because of tourism and because of the movies. And so life was really set up for me because that would go on to like change my entire life. So I get in to UNC Wilmington. It's so unbelievably toxic and othering and racist that I take time off school. I get really depressed. I flunk out, take time off school. And when my parents were like, "No, you don't have the luxury of taking time off school," I looked at my best friend and he was like, "Well, you could go where my dad teaches. You could just go to A&T and I'm sure they'll take you even with you dropping out." And when I tell you my first week of class, the director of the English department, um, hears me do a poem, and that was, like, the first thing you had to do for that class was do an original piece. You had to get up for the whole class and do a piece either from memory or from paper. She heard me do it, and Dr. Ahmad is blind, and she was like, "I can't see you, but that poem was so powerful. I want you to do that for the rest of your life." And
Wow.
literally, that's all no one had ever said it before about my writing. I knew that I could perform. I had been performing since I was 5. I was classically trained to perform it. So my parents put me in every class, every camp, everything you can imagine. Um, So I knew that I could speak and perform, but nobody had said anything about my writing until at this point, I'm a non-traditional student. I've gone to 3.5 years of UNCW, taken time off. I did a student exchange period, and so I had kind of fumbled my way through college, and was already I was 20, 21 by this time, and that was the first time somebody had said, like, "This is what you need to do."
Hmm.
So it wasn't until I transferred to A&T, in 2009 did I really believe that writing could be a career. I mean, my mom, like I said, my mom and my grandmother, we were ferocious readers, and, like, the Black poets and Black writers were always a topic of conversation in our house, but no one actually told me that, like, my thoughts about the world and my response to books were important. That was the first time somebody told me, like, my thoughts and my stories and my views were important, and so important that she told me that I should make a career out of it, and I was like, "What?" And so that's exactly what I did. The day I graduated, me and 4 of the best poets in my class, we became very close, and we started my first nonprofit, Poet She, in Greensboro, North Carolina, and we were filling out the paperwork to get our 501(c)(3) the day we were graduating, which was crazy.
I love
But,
that, by the way. That's
yeah.
wild. Yeah.
So that's when I said, "Okay, this woman who's, like, this renowned," at the time, she was like, you know, just like, this amazing beacon in North Carolina in the community. She was basically akin to Jackie Sheldon Green, who was our poet laureate, and so I so looked up to her, and for her to say that I should do this, I was like, "Okay, I'm gonna just follow whatever she tells me I'm gonna do." So I got my degree, and I decided to make it do a be serious about it. So that's yeah.
As a teacher, as an educator, this is like every educator's dream come
Mhm.
true, but also as someone who had that similar experience, at the end of my sophomore year in college, where the first
Yeah.
person to ever tell me I was smart,
Wow.
Professor Patrick Burke, rest in peace, he passed away late last fall.
Yeah.
Um, these are really transformative moments. I really love I don't wanna call it impatience, the urgency of, you didn't wait and sort of say, "Let me go work here, work there, and then maybe we'll come up with a poet collective business sort of incorporation." Filing that paperwork straight away. I hope my oldest son, who just graduated from college a week and a half ago, I hope he hears this and, like, "Miles, you
Oh,
gotta get
no.
on this, my friend. I need to see this
No,
ambition out of you."
that was a little too ambitious. I think we were a little crazy.
He's he's fine, he has a plan, he just needs a job ASAP, so
There
anybody
you go.
hiring in Atlanta, just write me. Um, my kid's a very good worker. Anyway, so, you've talked about this, really, for me, like, it's really interesting sort of transition between, having training and experience and sort of childhood and on experience as a performer. I'm interested in a sort of a little bit of a shift from that and ask you, what is the role of study in your writerly practice?
Yeah, so like I said, I learned later, actually in lieu of writing and in lieu of learning that my ancestors are from the South. I didn't know that not only are we from the South, but I come from, like, voracious learners, readers, and very studious women and men.
Hmm.
And
Mhm.
so I think that it was always in my DNA to be a studier. So for me, I've been really obsessed with reading and studying craft. And I laugh at myself now because I've taken this interesting trajectory where for whatever reason. And I think, representation matters, as we know, and is everything and influences the way, especially marginalized people's relationship with study and learning. And so I think because of my experiences of being the only Black girl, but I was a straight A student, one of the things that I contend with now as I look back is the fact that, yes, I was very studious, but there was a missing piece for me, no one had given me permission yet, to let the perfection of study go.
Mm.
But there's an imperfection, and a freedom in studying and being a learner because you want to, and not because there's this societal pressure or respectability politics almost. And so as a young kid, I felt a lot of pressure. I mean, my I have a poem about in Ghost in Black Ghost Road about how my teachers used to change my A papers to Fs. That actually happened. My mom used to have to come to the school and be like, "So all these answers are right. Why did you say that Khalisa didn't get them right?" And it was just racism, right? And so I think that had a interesting influence on my relationship with study. I also think similarly, going to college in a place that was the birthplace of the 1898 race massacre and having no one talk to me about that, and there was nothing in the history books that talked about Tulsa or 1898, and I ended up failing, out of college and thinking that I wasn't good at learning, when
Hmm.
it wasn't that I wasn't good, it was the environment was not conducive to my learning
Hmm.
experience, and so now, I say that I'm following in the footsteps of the matriarchs. I am so obsessed with school, I'm thinking about going back to get my PhD. I'm crazy. But now I make it a point to soak up as much um, knowledge as possible about cadence and oral history and speech and rhetoric, because I am a poet at heart. And now that I'm moving away from poetry and moving to prose, what I'm learning is so lucky that I started as a poet and that poetry was introduced to me really young, and that's like the foundation of my
Hmm.
study
Hmm.
because I now have these tools that a lot of folks that immediately some folks that don't have that in their toolbox. I feel really lucky that don't have cadence and rhythm, in their toolbox. I feel lucky because I am a spoken word artist as well, and I've done slam poetry. And so I like that throughout the years, my study has been very hybrid. It's been multi genre,
Hmm.
that I've dipped my toes in the oral tradition. I've dipped my toes in storytelling. I've been an actor. I've written plays. And so my study has been very across genre, not only in what I read, but the classes that I've taken and things that I've published and things that I've, yeah, studied. So, yeah, and the writers that I've learned from have been across genre, and so I think, yeah, I've been lucky throughout my study. I think, and now that I'm pivoting in genre, I think that will only add an extra layer onto the work that I'm writing now. So, yeah,
Well, you said your mother was a teacher and your grandmother
yeah,
was a librarian, so I'm thinking, books and study. Study, as you
yes.
said, the matriarchal line carries a lot of habits with it, values, I imagine, all those sorts of things. Yeah, doing a PhD. I mean, I always think it's a great thing. I did one, so I always recommend it. It's terrible for your self-esteem until you're done, and then
Yes.
it's great for it.
Mhm.
That's the ultimate experience of delayed gratification at the existential level. So, um, well, let me ask about your writing. What do you think? What do you think your writing has to say or wants to say about Black life?
I really hope that my writing now, as I said, I'm pivoting to prose. My next collections and manuscripts are a YA novel in verse, and a novel and an essay collection. And all of them are at that back to that contradiction. The intersection of race and identity, and pleasure and religion. And because, speaking of study, because I've been, lucky to have been brought up by the James Baldwins and the Audre Lordes and the Polly Murrays and all those intersectional writers that talked about the contention, and Toni Morrison was extremely influential in my writing. What I hope to say is to carry on the conversation that those great writers started, which is that we are not monoliths as Black writers, that And also that, when we think about identity, that it's not this, line, it's not linear,
Mhm.
that it moves and flows, it's fluid. And so many times society and family and institutions try to box Black folks and Black creators into, yeah, pigeonhole us, and define us by, these small things when we're so much more textured and layered than that.
Mhm.
And so I hope to say, and show and highlight how broad stroked we are and vibrant we are, and also to break the shame barrier that a lot of us, I think, myself and my peers carried around, those of us that, grew up in extremely religious households and, that were felt very confined to these respectability rules of like what a woman should say and what they should do and how we should dress and how we should talk and who we should date. I think I really want to, um, give other women and girls like me permission, to live themselves fully, and embrace who they are to just be without those limitations and shame and constriction. So that's what I hope to do with my work. That's what I hope to say. Yeah.
How do you think about your writing then in relation to the history of Black writing? How do you sort of see it fitting? I mean, you mentioned Morrison and Lord and Baldwin and others. Sort of, how do you see it fitting in in a sort of Black writerly tradition? But also, and maybe you already spoke to it right there. But what boundaries do you think it pushes, or sort of new horizons you think it's opening up?
I think it's fitting into the tradition of the greats that have come before me in, um, a lot of ways. I see myself as a part of the continuum. So where Morrison, was very interested in Black trauma and the crimes against Black girls' bodies, I believe that my work is in conversation and a continuation,
Mhm.
of that. I also think that many of the writers that have come before me and are in conversation with me, they touched on and were interested in interiority, and the juxtaposition of, um, the loneliness of the Black person, sensuality, softness, hardness, um, and the almost war, the internal war of contradiction and juxtaposition of all of those things happening internally at once. And I think that my work is in conversation and strives to do that as well as I, um, at all times have had a reality of being, yeah, my feet in 2 worlds at all at one time, from the time
Mhm.
that I was a kid and, in a very urban area, but going to private school, and then being from the Midwest, but living in the South, and being very religious, but also realizing I was queer, and so always being at war with myself in a way, or at war with, what was expected. And I think all of the not only, legacy writers like Morrison and Baldwin and Lord, but certainly contemporary, writers who are coming before me, like Jericho Brown and Terrence Hayes and Jessamine Ward and Tiana Clark. I think, we're all following in the oral tradition of what pressures are on the Black person now in the world that we live in, with, race and identity politics being so fraught right now, but also how can we, lean into who we are and the intersections of who we are fully. And I think, yeah, those writers and I are living proof, um, that we're so much more, that Black life is so expansive, that there's this beauty and this horror and this intimacy and strangeness, and I think several of us are in conversation with that in the same way that, Octavia Butler talked about the strangeness, of Black life
Mm.
and imagining a better future. And I just think my work is in the vein of that and strives to follow in their footsteps. So, yeah.
I love that. Thank you. And, I think they probably have already started to speak to this next question a little bit, um, because I love the way you show. What I liked about the way you responded to that is showed both the way there's a continuity that you're a part of, but the way that continuity that you're a part of is already a kind of discontinuity that's already at these open horizons. And so I wonder if it's maybe already part of an answer to this question, but I'll ask it anyway, which is, what do you think that historically Black writers have done well, and what do you think they've not done particularly well?
I think historically, Black writing has done an incredible job of bearing witness. I think
Yeah.
we've talked about these writers that historically have touched on the racial and social um, and familial turmoil um, happening not just to Black bodies, but to underserved communities and those that are constantly under pressure. And so I think that that has been the thing that Black writers have done where is to bear witness to atrocity, but also bear witness to joy at the same time. And I think Black writers have done an amazing job at documenting emotional and political realities that institutions and society have tried to erase for so long
Hmm.
or change or morph or whitewash, as we kind of harkened back to what I was saying before about being in school and not learning that 1898 ever existed, and had I not had the Black griots in my community pass down that information, I would have never known, and then I would have never written about it. Um, and so I think the retelling and the documenting of these histories has been something we've done really well. And I think that goes with preservation as well, this preservation of language and migration and spirituality and survival. All those things have we've done well, and it's been transformative to our community. Um, I also think that we've done really well at meeting the moment. I think we've been very responsive to moments when things have happened. I've been just so struck how Black writers have there'll be an incident that happens, especially during the pandemic or the Black Lives Matter movement, when there were so many collections that came out that instantly were meeting the moment of what was happening with the deaths of all
Hmm.
these innocent Black men. At the same time, I think there are moments when Black writing often feels like, and I think it's really because of the industry that we're in and the publishing industry, I think puts a pressure on Black writers to not be as vulnerable as they could be and imperfect as they could be. I do think going back to what I mentioned about um, this pressure to be respectable or to fit in a certain nice, tidy box, I think this industry inherently likes to usher us into these clean boxes. Like you are this type of writer and you stay in the lane of this type of writer. You speak about these subjects, and so you're only allowed to talk on these topics. And so I think sometimes, um, because of those pressures from this art and this craft and this industry, that many of us have not found ways to push beyond those very limiting boxes. And I would love to see us do that more. And I also think going back to strangeness, I would love to see folks expand more around Black absurdity and weirdness, um, and horror. And, Bell Hooks said that queerness is actually anything that is at contention or at odds with the world. Um, and what the world has normalized. And so I would love for people to push that definition more. Is like, what does it mean to be at odds with
Mm-hmm.
normalcy? What does it mean to lean into strangeness? Um, and things that make people feel uncomfortable and scared, or that might be quirky or eccentric or weird. And so I think that we still have some expanding to do in that way.
I mean, the that notion of weird in relation to that other word you used, industry. I mean, those are not easily compatible terms, aren't necessarily
Yeah.
antithetical, but
Yeah.
that's a tension. And it's a real tragedy because, of course, I mean, people lead deeply weird lives, and those are very
Yes.
interesting lives,
They are. They are.
And, I talk
Yeah.
to my students about this all the time, and I'm, increasingly, and generative artificial intelligence has definitely expedited this, but trying to get students to be more creative in response to course materials. And one thing I
Mhm.
always encourage them to do is to embrace, and I use that word weird. I said, feel free
Yes.
for it to be weird. And they are
Yeah.
completely horrified at the very idea that they would display that.
Yep.
And I
Yep.
was like, if you're not weird and you're like, because I don't think I'm a particularly weird person, and it's actually should be embarrassing, but the
Yes.
idea is that it's not,
Yeah.
and that the weird is the embarrassing. But what I find, if you can get students, and students are here just to stand in for human beings, of course,
Yeah.
they are human beings. Almost sounded like I was like they're not, but you know what I mean. Um,
Yes.
but if they can step into that, what it unlocks in terms of their capacity to express really important things is really immense.
Yeah.
This is a way of sort of, when you said that, it really struck me in terms of my own classroom experience over the last few years,
Absolutely.
and where there are these points of liberation, but interesting, like fumbling liberation, like they don't know what to do with it. And I was like, let's try to get to the point where
Yes.
people know what to do with it rather than
Yes. Yeah.
feel surprised.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I just want to say this that I feel like college is the place where you need someone to give you permission to color outside the lines. I literally had to have a professor in my MFA program. I'll never forget, Maury Creech was like, you have to know the rules to break them. And Khalisa, I'm telling you that I want you to break them. And it literally was like a flip switch went off that I was
Mm.
like, okay, cool. I can finally like not stay inside the lines of this coloring book that I can like go off the page and do something strange and weird. And he's actually not only celebrating me, but telling me like that's the assignment is to
Yeah.
color outside of the lines. And so that was the flip switch for me. Like that, again, we talked about permission before with my professor giving me permission, but yet another professor giving me permissions to go outside the lines. So yeah.
And that's a fantastic one. I like that. It's a
Mhm.
rule-breaking time. Um, so maybe that's the beginning of a question, answer to this last question I have for you, which is, what's the one issue or one question you'd like to see artists and critics who are concerned with Black life be thinking about, or question to be asking?
So I have to say that I want us to think more about, um, yes, interiority, but more importantly, rest, um, and care, not as survival, because for so long we have seen care and rest be a means to an end, or it be after you labor, you earn rest, you earn peace, you
Yeah.
earn care and joy. And as someone who, as I was telling you, I have multiple illnesses, that is very traumatic to think that I don't get it until I have done good enough. It's the cookie at the end of eating your vegetables. And that can be a very toxic way to look at rest, especially um, from a community that's constantly at a sense of fight or flight. Um, and so I think that we're in a moment where visibility is also mistaken for care in a way. You see Black folks everywhere, and we are fighting to have our voice heard more. And I think a lot of times that can be seen as us a false sense of care for ourselves, when in all actuality, I think I would love to see us center stillness and privacy, um, and yeah, rest, so much so that we have made that the theme of our Black Writers Conference this year is rest, resilience, and radical joy, because I just feel like that's the issue that it's not written about enough, it's not talked about enough, it's not folks aren't concerned about it enough for me. And I feel like as Black creatives and artists, we cannot be feeling from empty vessels. And people say that all the time, but I don't think they actually realize that you literally, as a vessel, cannot create on E. And I think there is this like capitalistic pressure to produce, 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 produce. And when I'm done producing, then I get to care for myself. Then I get to rest. Then I get to have retreat. And so I'd love for us to really antagonize that, and not only look deeper, but talk about it more and leave space for it more, in our artist communities, in our writing communities, for care and rest, and stillness and privacy. So, yeah.
I like to antagonize it. I really love that, like as a way of phrasing it. And also, you said retreat as a thing that we earn, and there maybe is something really to play with in terms of the relationship between treat and retreat. What would it mean to have treat without a need to justify it? I mean to have rest as without justification.
Absolutely.
As someone who has struggles with that, I think most of us do. I mean, we all come from, you and I come from the same, national culture broadly. You said a capitalistic. It's absolutely destructive, and so I think like thinking about writing, thinking about creativity, thinking about criticism, all of those things coming from a human place that you've described right there is a really fantastic place to wrap this up and gives us a lot to think about. And I just really appreciate your time. I was really looking forward to this, and it's been fantastic, Khalisa. It's really a fantastic contribution to the series, and just really happy to have your voice on it. So thank you for your thoughtfulness. I appreciate it a lot.
Thank you. This has been great. I appreciate you.
All right. Well, you have a great rest of your day.
You too.
All right. Bye.
Bye.